The mining shafts of Kepler 442b stretched deep into the planet's core, where the air tasted of sulfur and despair. Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his brow as he swung his plasma cutter against the crystalline walls, each strike sending sparks dancing in the dim artificial light. The heavy shackles around his ankles clinked with every movement, a constant reminder of his bondage. 500 years. That's how long humanity had served the Vortak Empire as slaves. 5 centuries since the great ships had descended from the stars, their hulls gleaming like black mirrors, and taken everything from Earth. Marcus had learned this history from whispered stories passed down through generations of human workers in the mines, factories, and service stations scattered across a dozen worlds. The Vortak were not cruel masters in the traditional sense. They provided adequate food, basic medical care, and shelter. But they were utterly indifferent to human suffering, viewing their slaves as nothing more than biological tools. Efficient, replaceable, and bred for specific tasks. Marcus had been born in the mines, as had his father, and his father's father before him. Their genetic modifications made them perfect for the work, enhanced lung capacity for the thin air, improved muscle density for heavy labor, and eyes adapted to see clearly in the perpetual twilight of the underground tunnels. The Vortak themselves were tall, pale beings with elongated skulls and 6 spindly fingers on each hand. They moved with an eerie grace and spoke in clicking, melodic languages that hurt human ears. They had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy, but none had proven as useful as humans. Where other races had fought to extinction or proven too fragile for manual labor, humans had adapted. They had survived. Marcus's daughter, Elena, worked in the sorting facility 3 levels above. At 19, she was among the brightest of her generation, with an uncanny ability to identify the rare crystals that powered Vortak technology. The overseers had noticed her skills and were considering moving her to the refinery on Vortak Prime, the Empire's capital world. It was an honor that filled Marcus with dread. Those who went to Prime never returned. The work shift lasted 14 hours, as it had every day for as long as anyone could remember. When the resonance bell finally chimed, Marcus straightened his aching back and began the long climb to the surface. The elevator platforms were reserved for Vortak personnel and their most valuable equipment. Humans climbed. As he ascended the maintenance ladders, Marcus caught glimpses of the world above through ventilation shafts. Kepler 442b was a beautiful planet, with 3 violet moons that painted the landscape in ethereal light. Rolling purple grasslands stretched to distant mountains, and floating islands drifted lazily through the atmosphere, held aloft by natural anti-gravity minerals. It was a paradise that humans could see but never truly experience. The surface facility buzzed with activity as the day shift ended and the night crews prepared to descend. Marcus spotted Elena near the crystal sorting stations, her dark hair tied back in the practical style required by regulations. She was examining a particularly large specimen, turning it in the light to check for flaws. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the concentration on her face, the same expression her mother had worn when working on complex problems. Sarah had died in the mines when Elena was 12. A tunnel collapse, they said, though Marcus suspected it was something else. Sarah had been asking too many questions about the transport schedules, about where certain shipments went, about why some humans were selected for special duties and never seen again. The Vortak didn't tolerate curiosity. Father. Elena's voice broke through his dark memories. She had finished her work and approached him near the facility's main entrance. The supervisors spoke to me today. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What did they want? They're impressed with my crystal analysis. They want to transfer me to the refinement facility on Proxima Station. She tried to keep her voice neutral, but Marcus could hear the fear underneath. Proxima Station was just 1 jump away from Vortak Prime. When, he asked. Next cycle. 3 days. Marcus looked around carefully, ensuring no Vortak overseers were within earshot. Elena, I need to tell you something. Your mother didn't die in an accident. Elena's eyes widened. What do you mean? She discovered something. Something about the true nature of our enslavement. Before she died, she told me about hidden records, old human databases that survived the conquest. She said there were others like us, scattered across the galaxy, and that someday Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. Someday, someone would come to free us. That's just a story, Father. A dream to make the work bearable. Maybe. But, your mother believed it. And, she died protecting that belief. Marcus gripped his daughter's shoulders. If they take you to Proxima Station, I may never see you again. But, if there's any truth to what she discovered, any hope at all, then, someone needs to carry that knowledge forward. Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the alien landscape. Tell me everything she found. As the twin suns set behind the floating islands, casting long shadows across the mining complex, Marcus began to share the secrets that had cost his wife her life. He told Elena about the hidden communication networks that connected human settlements across dozens of worlds. About the careful records kept by each generation, documenting Vorthack military positions, trade routes, and technological capabilities. About the growing whispers of a human resistance that operated in the deepest reaches of space. But, most importantly, he told her about the Drachmarie. The Drachmarie? Elena had never heard the name before. An ancient race that ruled this galaxy long before the Vorthack rose to power. Your mother found references to them in the old databases. They were mighty warriors, beings of fire and fury who fought with honor and protected the weak. The Vorthack drove them to the edge of extinction, but they say some survived in the Outer Rim territories. What does that have to do with us? Marcus looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Your mother believed that the Drachmarie would return. That when they learned of our suffering, they would come to our aid. She said they had a code of honor that couldn't tolerate slavery. Elena followed his gaze upward. Even if they exist, why would they care about humans? Because, Marcus said softly, according to the old records, humans and Drachmarie share something in common. Something the Vorthack fear above all else. What? The capacity for righteous rage. 3 days passed quickly. Elena prepared for her transfer, packing the few personal belongings allowed to human workers. Marcus gave her a small data crystal, carefully hidden in the lining of her work jacket. It contained copies of everything Sarah had discovered, encrypted in an old Earth language that the Vorthack translation programs couldn't decode. On her last night on Kepler 442b, Elena stood on the observation platform near the communication array. The facility was quiet except for the low hum of machinery and the distant sounds of the night shift beginning their work below. She was memorizing every detail of the world she'd known all her life, when she noticed something strange in the sky. A new star had appeared near the constellation humans called the Hunter. It pulsed with a red light, growing brighter as she watched. Then, another appeared. And another. Elena ran to find her father, who was finishing his shift in the deep tunnels. By the time they returned to the surface together, a dozen red lights dotted the sky. The Vorthack overseers had noticed too, and there was unusual activity around the communication center. What are they? Elena whispered. Marcus stared at the lights, his heart pounding. Ships. Those are ships dropping out of hyperspace. As they watched, the red lights began to move, arranging themselves in what looked like a battle formation. The Vorthack were now running between buildings, shouting orders in their clicking language. Emergency sirens began to wail across the mining complex. Then, the communications array crackled to life, broadcasting a message that echoed across every speaker on the planet. The voice was deep and resonant, speaking in perfect human English with an accent that seemed to carry the weight of mountains and the fury of thunderstorms. Vorthack Empire. Your 500 years of tyranny ends today. Release the humans you have enslaved, or face the wrath of the Drachmarie clans. You have one rotation to respond. Marcus grabbed Elena's hand as the message repeated in dozens of languages across the galaxy. Around them, other human workers had emerged from the tunnels and buildings, staring up at the red lights in the sky with a mixture of hope and terror. Father, Elena whispered, your mother was right. The red lights pulsed brighter, and, for the first time in 5 centuries, humanity dared to hope for freedom. The night sky of Kepler 442b had never seemed so beautiful, or so terrible, as it did in that moment when everything changed. The Drachmarie had returned, and their fury was about to shake the foundations of the galaxy. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he looked up at the ships that might finally bring his people home. But he also felt a chill of fear, knowing that the Vorthak would never surrender without a fight, and that the coming war would determine not just the fate of humanity, but the future of every species in the galaxy. The message faded, but the red lights remained, hanging in the sky like vengeful eyes. In the distance, Marcus could see Vorthak defensive positions powering up, their shields glowing blue against the alien landscape. The 500-year enslavement of humanity was about to end, one way or another. Elena squeezed her father's hand. What happens now? Marcus looked at his daughter, then up at the Drachmarie fleet, and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Hope. Now, he said, we prepare to be free. The Vorthak response came at dawn, delivered not through diplomatic channels but through the thunderous roar of orbital defense platforms powering to life. From the mining complex on Kepler 442b, Marcus and Elena watched as brilliant blue beams lanced upward from hidden military installations scattered across the planet's surface. The defensive grid that had remained dormant for decades suddenly revealed itself in all its terrifying glory. They're not surrendering, Elena said, her voice barely audible over the growing rumble of military machinery. Marcus pulled her behind a storage container as Vorthak soldiers marched through the complex, their pale faces grim with determination. These weren't the usual overseers who managed the mining operations. These were Imperial Guard units, armed with plasma rifles and wearing full combat armor that shimmered with energy fields. The human workers were being herded into containment areas, their confused voices mixing with the harsh commands of their captors. Marcus realized with growing horror that the Vorthak intended to use them as shields, betting that the mysterious Drachmarie would hesitate to attack planets full of the very people they claimed to be rescuing. Attention all human units, a Vorthak commander announced through speakers positioned throughout the facility. You will remain in designated areas for your own protection. Any attempt to leave your assigned zones will be met with immediate termination. The Empire protects its valuable assets. Even now, facing an existential threat, the Vorthak could only think of humans as property to be managed. Elena gripped the data crystal hidden in her jacket. Father, if we're going to die, someone else needs to know what Mother discovered. We're not going to die, Marcus said firmly, though his own faith was wavering. The Drachmarie didn't come this far to watch us perish. As if summoned by his words, the sky suddenly erupted in fire. The Drachmarie ships descended through the upper atmosphere like falling stars, their hulls glowing red-hot from atmospheric entry. But these weren't the sleek, efficient vessels of the Vorthak fleet. These ships were massive, organic-looking craft that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. They moved with a predatory grace that reminded Marcus of the great hunting beasts from Earth's ancient past. The lead ship was enormous, easily 3 times the size of a Vorthak battlecruiser. Its hull was covered in what looked like scales, and massive wings extended from its sides, crackling with energy discharges. As Marcus watched in amazement, he realized the truth: these weren't ships at all. They were living creatures, biomechanical dragons that had crossed the void between stars. The orbital defense platforms opened fire, sending columns of blue energy up to meet the descending forms. But the dragon ships simply absorbed the blasts, their scales glowing brighter with each impact. When they finally returned fire, it was with beams of pure white-hot fury that cut through the Vorthak shields like they were made of paper. The first defense platform exploded in a ball of superheated plasma, its debris raining down across the mining complex. The humans in the containment area screamed and pressed themselves against the ground as fragments of metal and crystal struck the barriers above them. Marcus pulled Elena closer as the dragon ships settled into attack formations. From his position behind the storage container, he could see individual Drachmarie warriors beginning to emerge from ports along the creature's flanks. They were magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. The Drachmarie stood nearly 8 feet tall, with powerful builds that spoke of evolved predators. Their skin was deep red and covered in natural armor plating that shimmered with an inner fire. Most striking were their faces, which combined reptilian features with an unmistakable intelligence that burned in their golden eyes. Massive wings folded against their backs, and their hands ended in claws that could probably tear through Vorthak armor with ease. But it wasn't their physical presence that made Marcus's breath catch. It was the fury that surrounded them like an aura of heat. Even from a distance, he could feel their rage at what they had found on this world. The Drachmari weren't just here to rescue humans, they were here to deliver justice. The lead Drachmari, wearing elaborate armor that seemed to be forged from starfire itself, landed near the facility's main communications array. When it spoke, its voice carried across the complex with the force of a thunderclap. I am Warlord Thane of the Ember Clan. By the ancient laws of the Drachmari, I claim this world and all enslaved beings upon it under the protection of our fire. Vorthak oppressors, surrender now or face the fury of dragons awakened. The Vorthak commander emerged from the control building, flanked by a squad of Imperial guards. Even from his hiding spot, Marcus could see the alien's hands trembling as he activated his translation device. This world belongs to the Vorthak Empire by right of conquest. The humans are our property, legally acquired. Your interference violates galactic law. Warlord Thane's laughter was like the sound of a volcano erupting. Galactic law? You speak of law while keeping sentient beings in chains? The dragon warrior's eyes began to glow brighter. There is only one law the Drachmari recognize: the strong protect the weak, and those who prey upon the innocent must burn. The confrontation might have continued, but a new development changed everything. From the human containment areas came a sound that Marcus had never heard in 5 centuries of slavery, the sound of humans fighting back. It started in Section C, where the youngest and strongest workers had been penned. Someone had managed to short-circuit the electronic barriers, and the humans were pouring out, improvised weapons in their hands. Generations of suppressed rage were finally finding an outlet, and the effect was immediate and overwhelming. The Vorthak guards were caught completely off guard. They had grown complacent over the centuries, viewing humans as docile livestock that could be managed with minimal force. They had forgotten that humans were still predators under their skin, evolved from creatures that had once conquered an entire planet through sheer determination and violence. Elena grabbed Marcus's arm. Look, father. They're fighting. The uprising spread like wildfire through the complex. Humans who had never raised their voices above a whisper were now screaming battle cries in languages that hadn't been heard for 500 years. They fought with mining tools, with improvised explosives, with anything they could find. And they fought with a fury that seemed to match that of their dragon liberators. Warlord Thane watched the rebellion unfold with obvious approval. Your property seems to have developed opinions, Vorthak. Perhaps you should have treated them better. The Vorthak commander raised his plasma rifle, aiming it at the nearest group of human fighters. They will return to their containment or they will die. All of them. The shot never came. Moving faster than Marcus's eyes could follow, Warlord Thane crossed the distance between himself and the Vorthak commander in a single bound. His clawed hand closed around the alien's throat, lifting him off the ground. 500 years, the dragon warrior growled, his voice now carrying an undercurrent of flame. 500 years these people have suffered under your boot. Did you think there would be no reckoning? The other Vorthak soldiers raised their weapons, but hesitated as more Drachmari warriors landed around them, surrounding the entire complex. The dragon beings moved with lethal grace, their wings creating shadows that seemed to swallow the alien light. Please, the Vorthak commander wheezed, his translation device sparking with damage. We can negotiate. The humans are valuable to us, but we could discuss terms of compensation. Compensation? Warlord Thane's grip tightened. You think you can buy your way out of this with currency? The debt you owe cannot be paid with credits or crystals. Around the complex, the human uprising was gaining momentum. Groups of workers were overwhelming guard posts, seizing weapons, and beginning to coordinate their attacks. Marcus could see Elena watching the rebellion with fierce pride, her eyes bright with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. But the Vorthak were not defenseless. As the immediate shock wore off, they began to mount an organized response. Heavy weapons platforms rose from hidden positions, and reinforcement troops poured in from other facilities across the planet. The revolution that had seemed so promising began to falter as the reality of Vorthak military superiority reasserted itself. We need to help them, Elena said, starting to stand. Marcus pulled her back down. We need to stay alive. The Drachmari didn't come this far to watch us throw our lives away in a hopeless charge. As if hearing his words, Warlord Thane released the Vorthak commander and stepped back. The alien collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, but the dragon warrior was no longer paying attention to him. Instead, Thane was looking up at the sky, where something new was appearing. More ships were dropping out of hyperspace, but these weren't Drachmarie vessels. They were sleek, angular craft with the distinctive black hulls of the Vorthak Imperial Navy. A full battle fleet was arriving to reinforce the planetary defenders. "Well," Thane said conversationally, "it appears this will be more interesting than I anticipated." The dragon warrior spread his massive wings and took to the air with a sound like thunder. Around the complex, other Drachmarie followed suit, rising to meet the incoming threat. But, instead of retreating to their bioships, they flew directly toward the Vorthak fleet, weapons systems charging with divine fire. Elena gripped her father's hand as they watched the aerial battle begin. "Are they insane? They're outnumbered 10-1. Marcus watched the dragons climb toward the enemy fleet and felt something stirring in his chest. Maybe. Or maybe they know something we don't. The first engagement came when a Vorthak destroyer opened fire on Warlord Thane. The plasma bolt struck the dragon warrior dead center, but, instead of destroying him, the energy seemed to be absorbed into his body. Thane glowed brighter for a moment, then opened his mouth and breathed a stream of white-hot fire that melted through the destroyer's hull like butter. Around him, other Drachmarie were demonstrating similar abilities. They moved through the vacuum of space as easily as through atmosphere, their natural armor protecting them from the cold and radiation. They fought like living weapons, each one capable of single-handedly taking on capital ships. But, for every Vorthak vessel destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The sky filled with explosions as the battle raged, and debris began to rain down across the planet's surface. The mining complex shook with each impact, and emergency lights bathed everything in a hellish red glow. "We have to get to the communication center," Elena said suddenly. "What? Why?" Elena pulled out the data crystal her mother had hidden. "If the Drachmarie are willing to die for us, then we need to give them every advantage we can. Mother's data includes locations of every human settlement in this sector, plus Vorthak military installations and supply lines. They need this information." Marcus looked at his daughter with new respect. "That building is in the middle of the battle zone. Then, we'd better move fast." Together, they left their hiding place and began to work their way across the complex. Around them, the battle between humans and their captors continued to rage. Marcus saw scenes that would stay with him forever: elderly workers who had never shown defiance taking up arms alongside teenagers born into slavery. Engineers using their knowledge of Vorthak technology to turn the aliens' own weapons against them. Medics treating wounded fighters with makeshift supplies while plasma bolts flew overhead. But the cost was horrific. For every small victory, dozens of humans paid with their lives. The Vorthak might have been caught off guard initially, but they were seasoned warriors with superior equipment and training. The human fighters' courage was magnificent, but courage alone wasn't enough to overcome energy weapons and military armor. Marcus and Elena reached the communications center just as a squad of Vorthak soldiers was setting up a heavy weapons position outside its entrance. The aliens were preparing to retake the building from a group of human rebels who had seized it earlier. "We can't get past them," Marcus whispered. Elena studied the layout of the battlefield. "Maybe we don't have to." Before Marcus could stop her, she was running toward a different building, one that housed the power distribution center for the entire complex. Marcus followed, his heart racing as plasma bolts sizzled through the air around them. Inside the power center, Elena quickly located the main control panel. Her years of crystal analysis had given her an intimate knowledge of how Vorthak technology worked. Her hands flew over the controls, rerouting power flows and adjusting frequency modulations. "What are you doing?" "Overloading the grid. In about 30 seconds, every energy weapon in the complex is going to shut down for approximately 10 minutes while the system resets." Elena's fingers danced across the holographic interface. "That should give our people a fighting chance." The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, but Marcus could already hear the difference outside. The constant buzz of plasma weapons had fallen silent, replaced by shouts of confusion and the clang of improvised melee weapons. Elena grabbed her father's hand.
Now we run.
They sprinted across the darkened complex toward the communications center. Around them, the nature of the battle had completely changed.
Without their energy weapons, the Vorthak were just tall, thin aliens facing angry humans armed with mining tools and industrial equipment.
The tide of battle was turning rapidly. At the communications center, they found the human rebels had successfully driven off the Vorthak soldiers. A young woman Marcus recognized from the crystal sorting facility was working frantically at the main communications console.
"I can't reach anyone," she said desperately. "The Vorthak must have jamming systems in orbit." Elena pushed past her to the console. "Not jamming. They're using quantum encryption on military frequencies."
"But, I know the bypass codes." Elena inserted the data crystal and began uploading her mother's files to every communication channel she could access. The information spread across the network like wildfire: locations of prison camps, schedules of supply convoys, technical specifications of Vorthak military equipment, and, most importantly, a complete database of every human settlement in known space.
Above them, the battle in space was reaching a crescendo.
Through the shattered windows of the communications center, Marcus could see Drachmarie warriors engaged in single combat with entire squadrons of Vorthak fighters. The dragon beings moved through space like living missiles, their natural weapons more than a match for conventional military hardware. But something was changing in the battle's rhythm. More Drachmarie ships were arriving, but these weren't the same as the ones that had come before. These vessels were larger, older, and covered in battle scars that spoke of countless conflicts. They moved with the confidence of predators that had never known defeat. The largest of the new arrivals was a massive bioship that dwarfed even Warlord Thane's vessel. As it settled into position above the planet, a new voice thundered across all communication frequencies. "I am High Warlord Sethrak of the Crimson Flame Clan. The Drachmarie have heard the cries of the enslaved, and we have come with fire and fury to break their chains. To all Vorthak forces, your empire ends today." The bioship began to glow with internal fire, and, when it opened its massive jaws, what emerged wasn't breath or plasma, but dozens of smaller dragon warriors riding what looked like living starfighters. They swept down upon the Vorthak fleet like a plague of destruction, and everywhere they struck, ships simply ceased to exist. Elena gripped Marcus's shoulder as they watched the tide of battle shift decisively.
"Father, we're going to be free."
But, even as he allowed himself to hope, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Vorthak Empire spanned half the galaxy and had stood for over 1,000 years.
One battle, no matter how decisive, wouldn't be enough to bring it down.
Still, as he watched Drachmarie warriors soaring through space with fire trailing from their wings, Marcus began to believe that maybe, just maybe, his daughter would grow up in a universe where humans were citizens rather than slaves. The 500-year nightmare was ending, but the real test was yet to come. Outside, the last Vorthak strongholds were falling to combined human and Drachmarie forces. The age of slavery was over, but the age of freedom would have to be earned through trials that none of them could yet imagine. 3 months after the liberation of Kepler 442b, Marcus Chen stood in the command center of the Drachmarie flagship Eternal Flame, watching holographic displays show the systematic collapse of the Vorthak Empire. The data his wife Sarah had died protecting was now being used to coordinate the greatest liberation campaign the galaxy had ever seen. Elena worked beside him, her natural talent for analyzing complex systems making her invaluable to the Drachmarie military planners. She had grown in confidence and stature since their freedom, but Marcus could still see the wonder in her eyes when she looked out at the stars they now traveled between as equals rather than cargo. The Proxima Station assault was successful, reported Commander Kalen, a young Drachmarie warrior whose scales bore the bright gold markings of his clan. 7,000 humans liberated, and we recovered intact manufacturing facilities that will be crucial for the next phase. High Warlord Sethrak nodded approvingly from his command throne, a massive seat carved from a single piece of volcanic crystal. The ancient dragon leader was even more impressive up close than he had seemed during the battle. His scales were deep crimson touched with gold, and his eyes held the wisdom of countless campaigns fought across the centuries.
"The Vorthak retreat to their core systems proceeds as predicted," Sethrak rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of mountains.
They sacrificed the outer colonies to buy time for their defenses around the capital worlds. Marcus studied the tactical display, still amazed at how quickly he had adapted to freedom after 5 centuries of bondage.
What about the human populations in the core systems? They'll be the most heavily guarded.
And, the most important to liberate, Elena added, her fingers dancing over the analysis console. According to Mother's data, nearly 40% of all enslaved humans are concentrated in just 5 systems around Vorthak Prime.
Sethrak's attention focused on the young woman with approval.
Your mother was a remarkable spy, Elena Chen.
Her intelligence networks have saved more lives than she could have imagined. Elena's face clouded with old grief and new determination.
She believed humans and Drachmarie were natural allies.
I'm beginning to understand what she meant. The High Warlord stood and approached the central hologram, which showed the current disposition of forces throughout the war zone. Red markers indicated Drachmarie fleets, blue showed liberated human settlements, and the diminishing purple areas represented Vorthak-controlled territory.
The Vorthak Empire was built on a foundation of fear and subjugation, Sethrak explained, his claws pointing to key strategic positions. They conquered through overwhelming force, then maintained control by convincing their subjects that resistance was futile. But that same psychology makes them vulnerable now. Marcus watched as the dragon leader manipulated the display, showing predicted fleet movements and battle outcomes.
How so? They cannot conceive of defeat.
The idea that their 1,000-year empire could fall to inferior species is so alien to their thinking that they consistently underestimate us. They see the Drachmarie as primitive savages and humans as livestock that has somehow learned to bite.
Commander Kalen stepped forward, his expression grim.
But that arrogance is starting to fade, High Warlord. Our intelligence indicates they're mobilizing everything for a final stand around their capital system.
They're calling it Operation Eternal Dominion.
Elena pulled up additional data streams, her face pale as she processed the information. Father, look at these numbers.
They're concentrating nearly their entire remaining fleet.
1,200 ships, including their super dreadnought class vessels.
Marcus felt a chill run down his spine.
The Vorthak super dreadnoughts were legendary, massive fortress ships capable of sterilizing entire worlds. During the conquest of Earth 5 centuries ago, just 3 of them had been enough to break human resistance completely. They plan to draw us into a decisive battle, Sethrak mused, his golden eyes studying the tactical projections. Force us to attack their strongest positions while they have every advantage.
Then, we don't take the bait, Elena said simply. We find another way.
The High Warlord turned to look at her with interest.
Explain. Elena called up a new set of displays, showing detailed schematics that made Marcus's heart race with recognition. These are the plans for the Vorthak Prime defense grid.
Mother's contacts included someone with access to the highest levels of their military planning. The entire system is protected by a network of automated defense stations, powered by a single massive reactor complex on the 4th moon of the main world. We know this, Commander Kalen said impatiently. Our battle fleets would be torn apart trying to fight through those defenses.
Yes, they would, Elena agreed. But what if the defenses weren't operational when we arrived? She manipulated the hologram to show the reactor complex in detail.
It was an impressive installation, buried deep underground and protected by multiple layers of shielding.
But Elena highlighted a series of small maintenance tunnels that led to the reactor core.
The Vorthak built these tunnels to accommodate their own body size and physiology, Elena explained. They never considered that other species might use them.
But humans are smaller, more flexible.
A small team could potentially infiltrate the reactor complex and disable it from within.
Sethrak leaned forward, his interest clearly captured. The risks would be enormous.
Once inside Vorthak space, such a team would have no support, no way to retreat if discovered. Marcus found himself speaking before he had fully formed the thought.
I'll go. Father, no. Elena spun to face him. I won't lose you too. You won't lose me.
But someone has to do this, and I know Vorthak systems better than most. 40 years in their minds taught me how their technology works.
Marcus looked around the room at the assembled Drachmarie warriors. Besides, this is something humans need to do for ourselves. We can't build a free future on the backs of our liberators. Sethrak studied Marcus with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. You understand this would likely be a suicide mission?
Better than a life mission spent in chains, Marcus replied.
For 500 years, humans have endured. Now it's time to act. The planning phase consumed the next several weeks.
Marcus found himself working closely with a select team of volunteers, all humans who had been liberated from various Vorthack installations. They were engineers, technicians, and former miners who shared his intimate knowledge of alien technology and his determination to strike a decisive blow for freedom. Elena threw herself into the mission planning with fierce intensity, using her analytical skills to identify every possible flaw in the defense systems. She worked 18-hour days, mapping security protocols and identifying optimal infiltration routes. You don't have to prove anything, Marcus told her one evening as they reviewed the latest intelligence reports. Your mother would be proud of what you've already accomplished. Elena looked up from her displays, exhaustion clear in her eyes. Mother died believing we would be free someday. I want to make sure that freedom is real, not just another form of dependence.
What do you mean?
The Drachmari are our allies, but they're also our rescuers. There's a difference between being saved and being liberated. If we can pull this off, if humans can strike the blow that brings down the Vorthack Empire, then we'll truly be equals in this galaxy. Marcus smiled at his daughter's wisdom.
When did you become so wise?
When I realized that freedom isn't just about breaking chains.
It's about proving you deserve to be free.
The infiltration mission launched 2 weeks later. Marcus and his team of 12 volunteers traveled aboard a captured Vorthack courier ship, using forged identification codes and transponder signals to slip past the outer patrols of the capital system. The journey to Vorthack Prime took 36 hours, during which they studied every detail of their target and rehearsed their roles. The plan was elegant in its simplicity: land on the reactor moon during a scheduled maintenance window, infiltrate the complex through the service tunnels, plant carefully designed explosives at key structural points, and escape before the destruction began.
Of course, everyone aboard knew that the escape phase was largely theoretical.
You know, said technical specialist Rivera as they approached their target, 5 centuries ago, my ancestors were farmers on Earth. I bet they never imagined their descendant would be sneaking into an alien fortress to commit acts of strategic sabotage. My family were teachers, added Engineer Williams. But I think they'd approve of the lesson we're about to give the Vorthack. Marcus looked around at his team, seeing the same mixture of determination and fear he felt in his own heart.
These weren't soldiers in any traditional sense.
They were ordinary people who had suffered extraordinary injustice and were finally in a position to do something about it. The courier ship landed at a maintenance facility on the dark side of the reactor moon, using credentials that Elena's intelligence network had provided.
The facility was largely automated, with minimal Vorthack personnel on duty.
Marcus's team, wearing stolen maintenance uniforms and carrying fabricated work orders, passed through security without challenge.
The reactor complex was even larger than the intelligence reports had suggested.
Miles of corridors and chambers stretched through the moon's interior, all dedicated to the massive fusion reactors that powered the capital system's defenses. The sound of the reactors was constant, a deep thrumming that seemed to make the very rock vibrate.
This way, Marcus whispered, consulting the schematics Elena had provided.
The maintenance tunnels were exactly where she had predicted, narrow passages that followed the main power conduits through the facility. Moving through the tunnels was like crawling through the arteries of some enormous beast. The walls radiated heat from the power systems, and the air was thick with electromagnetic fields that made their portable equipment malfunction sporadically. But they pressed forward, driven by the knowledge that millions of enslaved humans throughout the galaxy were depending on their success. They reached the reactor core chamber after 4 hours of careful progress. The sight that greeted them was both beautiful and terrifying, a massive sphere of contained fusion fire, held in place by magnetic fields so powerful they created visible distortions in the air. The energy output was staggering, enough to power the defenses of an entire star system. Demolition team, set your charges, Marcus ordered quietly.
We have exactly 17 minutes before the next security patrol comes through. The team worked with practiced efficiency, placing the specially designed explosives at carefully calculated points around the containment system. These weren't conventional weapons but rather sophisticated devices designed to create cascading failures in the magnetic containment fields. When they detonated, the fusion reaction would destabilize, causing a controlled implosion that would take out the entire reactor complex. "Charges set," reported Williams.
"Timer is armed for 15-minute delay." Marcus activated his communicator, sending a brief coded message that would be picked up by Drachmary ships waiting at the edge of the system. The message was simple: "The fire is lit." They were just beginning their retreat when the alarms began to sound.
"Security breach in Reactor Complex 7, announced an automated voice in the Vortac language. All personnel report to emergency stations."
Marcus felt his heart sink as the sound of running feet echoed through the corridors above them. Somehow, their presence had been detected. Whether through random chance or systematic security sweeps, the Vortac had found them. "Move, move, move," he whispered urgently. They crawled through the maintenance tunnels as fast as they could, knowing that Vortac security forces were already beginning to flood the complex. The aliens' voices echoed through the corridors, harsh and commanding as they organized search teams.
"Can we make it to the ship?" asked Rivera, her breathing labored from the rapid movement. Marcus checked his chronometer. 12 minutes until the charges detonated.
Even if they could reach the courier ship, there wouldn't be time to achieve a safe distance before the reactor went critical.
"New plan," he decided. "We split up.
Half the team makes for the ship, the other half creates a distraction to buy time."
"I'm staying with you," Williams said immediately.
"Me too," added Rivera. Marcus looked at his volunteers, seeing the same determination that had sustained humanity through 5 centuries of bondage.
"This isn't about heroics. It's about making sure the mission succeeds."
"We know," Williams replied.
"That's why we're staying." The next few minutes passed in a blur of desperate action.
Marcus led the distraction team through the complex, setting off small explosive charges and creating false alarms to draw security forces away from the escape route.
Behind them, they could hear Vortac soldiers closing in, their plasma weapons charging with deadly energy. 8 minutes to detonation.
Marcus's team had managed to lead the security forces away from the main evacuation route, but they were now trapped in the lower levels of the complex with no way out. The Vortac were closing in from all directions, their superior numbers and equipment making capture or death inevitable. "It's been an honor," Williams said quietly, checking his weapon one last time. "The honor was ours," Marcus replied, thinking of Elena and all the humans still fighting for freedom across the galaxy.
"Tell me something. Are you afraid?"
Rivera smiled grimly.
"Terrified.
But also proud. My children will be born free because of what we do here today."
5 minutes to detonation.
The first Vortac soldiers appeared at the end of the corridor, their pale faces visible behind energy shields. They moved with the confidence of hunters who had cornered their prey, plasma rifles trained on the small group of humans. "Surrender now and your deaths will be quick," their leader called out in broken human English. Marcus stepped forward, his chin raised defiantly.
"We are humans. We don't surrender. We endure."
The battle that followed was brief but fierce. Marcus and his team fought with the fury of people who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. They were outgunned and outnumbered, but they had something the Vortac didn't understand: 500 years of accumulated rage.
2 minutes to detonation.
Marcus felt plasma fire sear his shoulder as he dove behind a fallen support beam. Around him, his team was falling one by one, their improvised weapons no match for military equipment. But they had accomplished their mission. The escape team had reached the ship, and the charges would detonate whether they lived or died.
1 minute to detonation.
The Vortac security leader approached Marcus's position, confident that the battle was over.
"Your resistance is admirable but pointless, human.
The Empire has endured for 1,000 years.
It will endure for 1,000 more." Marcus laughed, the sound echoing off the reactor chamber walls. "You still don't understand, do you? It's not about the Empire. It's about what humans do when they're pushed too far." 30 seconds to detonation. The first charge exploded deep in the reactor core, sending shockwaves through the entire complex.
Emergency lighting flickered on as the magnetic containment fields began to destabilize. The Vortex soldiers looked around in growing alarm as the thrumming of the reactors changed pitch, becoming irregular and threatening.
"What have you done?" the security leader demanded.
Marcus smiled, thinking of Elena working alongside Drachmarie warriors in the fleet above, thinking of all the humans throughout the galaxy who would wake up tomorrow as free beings rather than slaves.
"We lit the fire," he said. The reactor complex disappeared in a flash of fusion flame that briefly outshone the system's star.
The explosion was visible from orbit, a new sun that bloomed and faded in the space of seconds. When the light cleared, the fourth moon of Vortak Prime was gone, and, with it, the defense grid that had protected the capital system for centuries.
Aboard the Eternal Flame, Elena watched the tactical displays as Drachmarie fleets poured into the undefended system.
Vortak ships tried to respond, but, without their defensive platforms, they were overwhelmed by the fury of dragons unleashed. High Warlord Sethrak placed a gentle claw on her shoulder.
"Your father died as a warrior, Elena Chen.
His sacrifice will be remembered in Drachmarie songs until the stars burn cold." Elena wiped tears from her eyes, her voice steady despite her grief.
"He died as a free man. That's what mattered to him."
The battle for Vortak Prime lasted 3 days. When it was over, the 1,000-year empire had fallen, and humanity was free. But the victory came with a price that Elena would carry for the rest of her life.
Years later, as Ambassador Elena Chen worked to establish the first truly democratic government in galactic history, she would often think of her father's words, "We are humans. We don't surrender. We endure."
Marcus Chen had endured 5 centuries of slavery and died bringing freedom to his people. His daughter would endure the challenges of building a better galaxy, one where no species would ever again know the chains that had bound humanity for so long. The Age of Empires was over.
The Age of Freedom had begun.
And, in the space between stars, where Drachmarie bioships carried human passengers as honored guests rather than cargo, the galaxy learned a new truth: never underestimate the fury of dragons, or the endurance of those they choose to protect. The 500-year nightmare was finally over, but the dream of true freedom was just beginning to unfold across the stars.